When does a tech company become a media organization? We discuss how much power Facebook has over the global media landscape and ask if it should be more transparent about how it takes what are effectively editorial decisions. Also on today's program, the male models calling for equal pay. We look at the gender pay gap in the fashion industry. And in Picture This, taking to the skies over New Mexico for the biggest hot air balloon festival in the world. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Facebook routinely denies that it's a media company and therefore that it shouldn't be expected to behave like one. But as more and more people around the world consume news via their Facebook feed, the tech giant's control over journalism and the news agenda is becoming more pervasive. The issue was highlighted recently when Facebook suspended the accounts of several Palestinian journalists, leading to accusations that the company was censoring journalists at the request of the Israeli government. Our newsmaker today is Facebook. Should it now be considered a major player in the international media? And if so, should it be more transparent about how it decides what gets seen and what gets blocked?
One in 7 people in the world use Facebook every day. For many of those users, it's become a major news source. So when Facebook takes down a post or suspends an account, it can lead to claims of political bias and censorship. The latest example was the company's suspension of the accounts of 7 Palestinian journalists. Editors from the Shahab news agency and the Quds news network had their accounts suspended without warning. Facebook later reinstated the accounts and apologised, but Palestinian activists are accusing the company of censorship. And they say the tech giant has struck a deal with the Israeli government to tackle so-called incitement, and is adopting the Israeli government's definition of what incitement is. It's not the first time Facebook has been caught up in a media storm. Philando Castile was shot dead by police in Minnesota earlier this year. The incident was broadcast in real time on Facebook Live by his girlfriend.
And the officer just shot him in his arm.
It was viewed more than 1 million times before Facebook took it down. The company said it was a technical glitch and put it back up, with a warning about graphic content. A sign that the company is making editorial decisions. And in another controversy, this defining image of the Vietnam War was repeatedly deleted from accounts, including the Norwegian Prime Minister's, because of nudity. What Facebook is doing by deleting photos like this, as good as their intentions are, is to edit our common history. And that's the problem. Facebook has become a news editor. Facebook describes itself as a social network, a platform for all ideas. Earlier this year, the company's top lawyer said suppressing political content or preventing people from seeing what matters most to them is directly contrary to Facebook's mission and business objectives. Facebook doesn't consider itself a news organisation, which frees it from taking editorial responsibility. But through the feeds it curates, it has become a news gatekeeper, with enormous power to either let in or shut the door on different kinds of information. When a user or government sees something they have a problem with, they report it to Facebook, and the company decides if it should be removed or left alone. So as Facebook's influence and reach grows, it's getting harder for it to say that it doesn't have a hand in the editorial game. Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
We're going to start with some more detail about the recent controversy over Facebook suspending the accounts of some Palestinian journalists. Raja Abdul Haq is the co-founder and editor of Quds News Network and joins me now from New York. Thanks a lot for joining us, Raja. Are you any closer to knowing why they suspended those accounts?
Thanks for having me. Until now, unfortunately, we have no idea why Facebook actually suspended or banned these profiles or these accounts, and let alone the other pages that were also taken down by other media outlets. Until now, every time we reach out to Facebook, they let us know that it was either by mistake or that these accounts were suspended because, as they claim, it's inciting violence against Israelis. Until now, we don't have an official statement that explains the systematic suspension of our accounts and other Palestinian media outlets, pages and accounts as well.
Israel's Justice Minister said the government had submitted 158 requests to have content removed since June of this year, and the company had granted 95% of those requests. Do you believe that your journalists who had their accounts taken down were a part of these requests?
Absolutely. I think, ironically here, the Israeli Justice Minister, Ayelet Shaked, who in 2014 called for a direct genocide against Palestinians, only 2 weeks before the kidnapping of Mohammed Abu Khdeir, who was burnt alive by Israeli settlers. That same Israeli minister who called for genocide is actually leading this effort to censor the Palestinian voices and to censor the Palestinian narrative on Facebook. And that campaign that is led by the Israeli government with the help of Facebook is literally designating any voice that is working to expose the Israeli occupation, that is working to expand on the Palestinian narrative and utilize the social media that was claimed to be founded on freedom of speech principles. We are trying to utilize it to spread the message, to raise awareness about our cause. And yet, anybody that says anything that is against the Israeli mainstream propaganda is automatically labeled anti-Semitic or automatically labeled as terrorists. So we refuse, and we don't accept the fact that Palestinian journalists are being called terrorists or being called that they are inciting violence for merely exposing the reality or the facts on the ground that the Palestinians have to suffer day to day because of the Israeli occupation.
Right. So there were journalists from Shihab Agency and Quds News Network, your news network. The Israelis say Quds is affiliated with Hamas. Are you affiliated with Hamas?
Absolutely not. We have no affiliation with any faction. And one of the reasons that our network is succeeding in the Palestinian to the Palestinian audience is the fact that we're not affiliated with anybody. But the fact of the matter that we are working objectively, but at the same time claiming our own narrative as Palestinians is problematic to the Israeli government. Israeli government want us to report their side and not the Palestinian side. But at the end of the day, we're not only working as journalists, we are actually Palestinians, and we're also suffering from the Israeli occupation. So it only makes sense that we also talk in a Palestinian voice, and it's not only that it's our duty as journalists, but it's also our duty as Palestinians to report the facts on the ground, but from a Palestinian narrative. Now, if Israel has a problem with anybody or any journalist, like it had for many years now, we know Israel targeted and attacked and killed tens of Palestinian journalists, and yet recently also they even arrested few Palestinian journalists for only writing on Facebook. So we're not worried only about the Israeli acts on the ground. We also worry that Facebook is actually sharing the data, the personal information with the Israeli government to make it easy to track down Palestinian journalists and to track down anybody that really just works onto exposing the Israeli occupation.
Okay, Raja Abdelhak, thanks so much for joining us. Good to talk to you. Now let's broaden out this conversation. Joining me now from London is Kevin Poulter. He's a lawyer with Child and Child Solicitors in London and also a social media commentator. And from Los Angeles in the US, I'm joined by Sarah Roberts. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Information Studies at University of California. Thanks both of you for joining us. Kevin, let me start with you. Is Facebook a news media entity in denial?
That's a good question. I'm not sure, and nor is Facebook, and nor are various governments around the world. They're all trying to work out, and this is the social media dilemma, really. Everything's new. For the first time, we have what's truly a global news source, and more people are taking their news from Facebook and from other social media platforms, and it's, to a certain extent, unregulated. It's the policing behind it is so imprecise and uncertain that it's got a job to do, but what that job is very difficult to determine, both for Facebook but also for the countries around the world where it's operating.
Sarah, help me understand this. I was looking at the Norwegian newspaper editor's post of that iconic photograph in Vietnam in 1972 of that young girl. So Facebook takes it down because presumably you think, okay, maybe nudity, there's an algorithm involved here. But then afterwards, they also delete the story from Aftonbladet about Facebook taking down the picture. So then I think, okay, maybe it's not an algorithm, maybe it's a person taking this down. Which one is it, Sarah?
Yes, great question. Certainly, I think Facebook and other social media companies are invested in the majority of us believing that algorithms, in other words, computers, are making these decisions as if somehow that makes the errors less egregious. But in fact, Facebook and companies like it employ legions of human beings around the globe in places like the Philippines, but also in places like Iowa in the United States and in Silicon Valley itself and so on, who essentially are doing the company's bidding in reviewing postings and making decisions about them. The thing to know about these workers is that they're often tasked with enormous amounts of content. They look at abhorrent material all day, and then they're asked to make decisions about it for very low rates of pay. Within this content are all kinds of politically charged materials that they are also made at times to take down. As your other guests have pointed out, the biggest problem here is the fact that this entire process is completely unavailable to us as users and to us as a society. So the opaque nature of it makes it impossible to really understand what's going on. And when Facebook finds itself in trouble, it can gesture either way, depending on what seems to make sense. So it's hard for us to have trust in this organization.
Yeah, Kevin, is it? Sorry, Sarah. Let me ask Kevin if there's maybe some hope in the fact that Facebook are equal opportunity offenders. Because, okay, so we heard the Palestinian journalist upset that they believe that Facebook is caving to the Israelis. There are people on the right in the United States, Pamela Geller and her crowd, who are upset that their stuff was taken down after the Orlando attack. There are Germans who are upset that their anti-migrant posts have been taken down by Facebook. There were men kissing, that was taken down, women breastfeeding, a plus-size model, and so on and so forth. It seems as if Facebook has found the entire spectrum of humanity to offend. Is that something that perhaps gives us some hope here, Kevin?
If you're going to discriminate equally across everybody, I think is what you're saying. It's a fairness issue, and there's transparency, which has already been alluded to, and we just don't know what that is. And the difficulty that Facebook has is that the algorithms are doing a certain job, but also it's a responsibility on all of us to report offensive posts, things that we maybe are against or opposed to. And how do we draw that line? And as it's been said, it comes down to individuals ultimately to make that decision. And the question is that really the decision of Facebook or a Facebook employee? Or should that be a decision of the courts, of the police, of the governments or local parliaments to make those decisions, to set those laws? And Facebook always has to abide by, or has chosen to abide by, the local laws in the areas that it operates in. And there's a responsibility there. But the more we move towards editorial controls, which is where we're talking, the greater the accountability, the greater the responsibility, and more importantly, the greater the liability on Facebook. And one thing it'll be keen to avoid is any liability for the content that's being posted on it by other people.
Interesting point there. Sarah, we look at Twitter, we look at Reddit, and other such platforms. They're often accused of allowing too much. A lot of people are calling for more censorship. They're saying, oh, I'm being trolled, or somebody's abusing me verbally and harassing me and so on and so forth on there. So they're accused of allowing too much. Facebook's being accused of too much censorship. Where do you draw the line, and who gets to decide what's, I guess, the happy medium?
Well, I think in the case of Facebook, one of the points that it was made in the report is that what it's doing primarily is circulating the news. It's not actually a content creator in and of itself. In that sense, what we're seeing is a vacuum as the footprint of global journalism has shrunk over the last few decades. And Facebook has certainly seen an important opening for itself in terms of providing content to markets around the world in lieu of more powerful journalistic organizations. But what it does is it does so without the lengthy and long-standing ethical frameworks under which journalists globally operate. And so it really is doing the news without any training or guidance to do it. And it has conflated it, as your guest just described, with its desire to enter markets globally. So it cuts deals around the world with governments. Certainly to be in Turkey, it's had to make decisions about disallowing certain content there and elsewhere in the world in order to gain potentially hundreds of millions of users. Who can fault a company that is profit-making and seeking revenue for its shareholders to do that, right? But socially and from a collective standpoint, I think we need to ask what's missing for us that Facebook is filling in.
So, Kevin, do you believe that it would be bad for business, as Sarah's saying, for Facebook to come out and stop being opaque and to say, hey, we're transparent. Yes, we know, we're curating the news for you. We're deciding on what you're going to see through your social media echo chamber, and that's okay because this is what we do. That would be bad for business for them. It's better to be opaque.
Facebook is all about generating more and more users, of course it is, and it's got a responsibility to its shareholders on that basis. But when we start talking about doing deals with governments, that's all well and good, so long as the deals that are done are, as we've said, transparent and that people can see what those deals are, what the responsibilities are, what people are entitled to post and what they shouldn't be posting. And that's when it comes down to the local governments and the local state law to make those decisions and to make that sort of public knowledge so that people can understand what they should and shouldn't be doing.
Kevin Poulter and Sarah Roberts, good to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming up next on the Newsmakers, is the fashion industry discriminating against male models? And in Picture This, hundreds of hot air balloons take to the skies in New Mexico for the biggest festival of its kind in the world. We're going to look at a story now about the gender pay gap. In almost all cases, this would involve a discussion about why women are being paid less than men. But in one industry, it would seem the reverse is true. And that's the world of high fashion and modeling, as Christine Perovalakis reports.
They're stylish and attractive. And compared to their female counterparts, they're grossly underpaid. The issue of equal pay in the workplace, it's normally about women being paid less than men. But in the world of modeling, the opposite is true. Male models earn up to 75% less than their female counterparts. On average, women are paid $50,000 for a top fashion show, while male models only get $12,000. According to Forbes magazine, the top 10 female models all took home multi-billion-dollar pay packets last year, with Gisele Bündchen topping the list at $44 million. By comparison, only the top 3 male models made over $1 million, with American model Sean O'Prey earning the most at $1.5 million. The problem of pay extends not only to the runway, but also to billboards, TV adverts, and magazine advertising. The fashion pay divide was fueled with the army of highly paid supermodels in the 1980s. Back then, Linda Evangelista famously told Vogue magazine that she and her supermodel friends didn't wake up for less than $10,000 a day. Past male models who have come close to supermodel status include Mark Vandaloo and Nick Kamen. But their success was no match for the likes of Cindy Crawford, Naomi Campbell, and Christy Turlington. One reason the fashion industry gives for the gender pay gap is sales. While women's fashion is worth $620 billion a year globally, the men's industry is only worth $400 billion. But that stands to change. Men are spending a lot more on taking care of themselves than they did a decade ago. And as more men go out and buy clothes and grooming products, could the industry's growth mean that male models also play catch-up in the pay race? Christine Beautiful-Lakis, The Newsmakers.
I'm joined now from London by Roger Frampton. He's a model represented by Premier Model Management Agency. Roger, good to talk to you. Now, in every other industry, well, nearly every other industry, this is the other way around, and the male paycheck dominates and women are fighting for gender pay equality. Does that make your job harder when you say, hey, male models need to be paid more? Does it make it harder for people to take you seriously?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, generally, the gap is about 18%. And in modeling, we're looking at a bigger gap of, say, 75% between female and male models' income.
Now, when people give you the market forces argument, when they say there's a greater demand for female models than male models, that, you know, for whatever reasons, whether you want to look at it sort of from an economic perspective, a sociological perspective, anthropological perspective, whatever, there's a greater demand for women than there is for men. That's why the market dictates that. What do you reply to that?
My response to that is it's now become a level playing field. I mean, 20 years ago, I would have highly agreed when I first started modeling about 13 years ago. And definitely it was a woman-dominated market. Now more than ever, in fact, 91% of men are out buying fashion clothes. There was a term coined in 1994 called metrosexual, and now metrosexual is commonplace. And in fact, there's one stat that says young men are spending more on shoes than women.
Have you found much support from among female models to bring male models up to earning what they're earning?
Yeah, absolutely, because I'm not asking for a reduction in a female model's salary. I'm just asking for an increase in men's.
How about those who say that male models have more longevity? So you're more likely to maybe get a deal at 40 to model suits or whatever than a woman is at 40, and that perhaps you're getting paid less now, but over the long run, you might have a longer career than the average female model.
Yeah, again, I mean, I would have agreed with that 10 to 15 years ago, but now, because they've introduced it's more socially acceptable for a normal size woman, so size 8, 10, 12, 14, a woman can work up to any age now, whereas before it was more size 6, you know, US size 0, strictly only, and now it's become more normal for women to work at an older age. So I think that argument's kind of gone.
How long do you think it's going to take you to get complete pay equity or pay equality?
As long as it takes, really. I mean, I don't know how much I've got left of my career, but I will keep campaigning.
Okay, and how are you campaigning? I've read a couple of articles. We're doing this interview here. You're sort of setting out, you know, your ideas. How else are you campaigning to let people know about this?
I think it's just more about creating awareness. You know, I think it's great that women are asking for equal pay in all other industries, and I think people are shocked when I say there's a 75% difference. So it's more just, you know, we spoke to the BBC in England last week, and now it's great that we're able to speak to you guys again, and it's just becoming more familiar, just getting the subject out there so people know that it's happening, essentially.
Okay, Roger Frampton, good to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
In today's Picture This, we're heading to Albuquerque in New Mexico for a hot air balloon festival that started back in 1972 and has now become the biggest of its kind. Let's take a look. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.